The old Ford pickup truck bounced along the dirt road, kicking up clouds of dust that painted the setting sun orange through the rear window. Jake gripped the steering wheel tighter, as another pothole sent his 3 passengers lurching in their seats. Jesus, Jake, you trying to give us whiplash before we even set up camp? Marcus laughed from the passenger seat, steadying the cooler between his legs. Hey, you wanted authentic wilderness experience. Jake shot back with a grin. This is as authentic as it gets, city boy. In the back seat, Emma rolled her eyes while checking her phone for the 100th time. Still no signal. I'm officially cut off from civilization. She looked at her boyfriend Danny, who was busy studying a worn topographical map. Please tell me you know where we're going. Danny looked up, his thick-rimmed glasses reflecting the dying light. According to this, we should hit Whispering Pines campground in about 10 minutes. It's been abandoned since the 80s, but the trails are still maintained by the Forest Service. Abandoned? Emma's voice carried a note of concern. Why didn't anyone mention that part when we planned this trip? Because you would have insisted on staying at some fancy KOA with hot showers and Wi-Fi, Marcus teased, earning him a playful punch from Emma. Jake slowed the truck as they approached a weathered wooden sign barely visible through the overgrown brush. Whispering Pines Campground. Est, 1962. Below it, a smaller, newer sign read, closed to public camping at own risk. Well, that's not ominous at all, Emma muttered. Come on, Em, where's your sense of adventure? Danny folded up his map and squeezed her hand. We've got everything we need for 3 days. Food, water, tents and enough firewood to keep us warm. What could go wrong? The truck's headlights illuminated a narrow trail, winding deeper into the towering pine forest. Ancient trees stretched up like cathedral columns, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even at dusk, the world below felt shrouded in perpetual twilight. As they drove deeper, Emma noticed something odd. Is it just me, or is it really quiet out here? Like, unnaturally quiet. Now that she mentioned it, the others began to notice it too. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, no buzz of insects, just the rumble of their engine, and the crunch of gravel under their tires. Probably just the time of day. Danny reasoned, though his voice lacked conviction. Animals are bedding down for the night. After another 5 minutes of winding through the increasingly dense forest, they came upon a small clearing. The remains of old fire pits and rotting picnic tables were scattered around the area, reclaimed by moss and wild vegetation. A rusted metal post held the remnants of what might have been a camp information board, now too weathered to read. This is it, Jake announced, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. They sat in the truck for a moment, taking in their surrounding. The clearing was larger than it had first appeared, probably able to accommodate a dozen campsites back in its heyday. Now, nature was steadily reclaiming it. Young saplings pushed up through cracked concrete pads, and ivy crawled up the few remaining structures. It's actually kinda beautiful, Emma admitted, though she stayed close to Danny as they began unloading their gear. In a haunted Stephen King sort of way, Marcus grabbed his tent bag and looked around appraisingly. I call that spot over there by the big boulder. Looks like it has natural wind protection. As they began setting up camp, the darkness seemed to press in around them with unusual speed. By the time they had their tents erected and a fire going, full night had fallen like a heavy curtain. Okay, this is officially the darkest place I've ever been, Emma said, stirring a pot of chili over the camp stove. I can't see 5 feet past the fire. It was true, the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight was complete and impenetrable. Their flashlights seemed to barely penetrate it, as if the forest itself was absorbing the light. Danny pulled out his acoustic guitar and strummed a few chords. Good thing I brought this. Nothing like campfire music to set the mood. As he began playing a gentle folk tune, they all felt themselves relaxing for the first time since arriving. The fire crackled warmly, the food smelled delicious, and despite the strange quiet of the forest, they were together and safe. That's when they heard it, a whisper, so soft it might have been wind through the trees, except there was no wind. Did you guys hear that? Emma asked, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. They all listened intently. For a long moment, there was nothing but the pop and hiss of burning wood. Then it came again, a sound like voices carried on a breeze that didn't exist, speaking words they couldn't quite make out. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, drifting through the trees like fog. Probably just the wind, Jake said, but his hand moved instinctively closer to the hunting knife on his belt. These old forests make weird sounds at night. Danny stopped playing guitar. What kind of sounds? Before anyone could answer, the whispering grew louder. It was definitely voices, multiple voices, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. But the words remained frustratingly unclear, like trying to understand a conversation through water. Okay, that's definitely not wind, Marcus said, standing up and peering into the darkness. That's people talking. Out here, in the middle of nowhere. Emma moved closer to the fire. Who would be hiking around an abandoned campground at night? The voices seemed to circle them, moving through the trees just beyond the reach of their firelight. Sometimes they sounded close enough to touch. Other times they faded into the distance before returning from a different direction entirely. "Hello?" Jake called out into the darkness. "Is someone out there?" His voice echoed through the forest, but the whispering stopped abruptly, as if whoever or whatever was out there was now listening. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the mysterious voices. It felt heavy, expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. "Maybe we should head back to town," Emma suggested quietly. "We could find a motel, start fresh in the morning, and drive these mountain roads in the dark." Danny shook his head. "That's probably more dangerous than whatever's out there. Besides, it's probably just other campers. People camp in weird places all the time. Other campers who whisper instead of talk and don't use lights." Marcus sat back down, but kept his flashlight ready. "That's some next-level weird camping etiquette." As if in response to his words, the whispering began again. This time it was close, much closer. And this time they could make out words. "Help us. Please help us. We can't find our way." The voices were desperate, pleading, and seemed to come from right at the edge of their campsite. Emma grabbed Danny's arm so hard he winced. "That's it," she said firmly. "I don't care about mountain roads. We're leaving. Now." But as Jake moved toward the truck, they heard something that made them all freeze in terror. The voices were no longer just at the edge of their camp. They were coming from inside their circle of light. Emma's scream pierced the night as she scrambled backward, knocking over her camping chair. The whispers were now emanating from the space directly across the fire from them. An area they could see was completely empty. "There's no one there," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. But even as he spoke, they could all hear the voices clearly now, as if invisible people were standing just feet away. "Please, so cold. Been walking so long. Can you see us? We've been trying to get home. The trees, they keep changing. Nothing looks the same." Jake grabbed a burning branch from the fire and held it up like a torch. But the additional light only confirmed what their eyes already told them. They were alone in the clearing, yet the voices continued, sometimes overlapping, sometimes taking turns, all pleading for help in tones of desperate confusion. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his usual joking demeanor completely gone. "People can't be invisible. This has to be some kind of acoustic trick, like sound bouncing off the mountains or something." But as he spoke, they heard footsteps in the dirt around their campsite, the unmistakable sound of people walking in circles around their fire. The footsteps were accompanied by the soft swish of fabric, and the occasional crack of a twig, but no matter where they pointed their flashlights, they saw nothing. "We need to get out of here," Emma said, her voice shaking. "Right now." She started toward the truck, but Danny caught her arm. Wait, look at this." He was staring at something near the fire pit. In the soft dirt around their camp, footprints were appearing, not all at once, but step by step, as if invisible people were walking around them. The prints were clear and distinct. Men's boots, women's sneakers, even what looked like a child's small shoe. "Holy shit," Jake breathed, watching as a new set of prints formed a path that led directly toward Emma. "They're real. They're actually real. Just not visible." Emma backed away from the approaching footprints, but more appeared behind her. They were surrounded by invisible presences, all apparently trying to get closer to their fire. "Why can't we see them?" Danny asked, his scientific mind still trying to rationalize the impossible. "If they can leave footprints, if we can hear them, why are they invisible?" The answer came in a voice different from the others, older, more authoritative, tinged with an accent they couldn't place. "Because we've been here too long. The forest, it changes you, takes pieces of you until there's nothing left for the living world to see." This new voice was coming from directly behind Marcus, who spun around so fast he nearly fell into the fire. "Who are you? What do you want? We were campers like you." That was, how long now? Time moves strangely here. Could be months, could be years. "We came for a weekend trip and never left." Emma felt ice water in her veins. "What do you mean, never left?" "The trails," a woman's voice explained, seeming to come from right beside Emma's ear. "They don't lead where they used. We tried to hike out the first morning, but every path just led us in circles. Back to this clearing, back to where we started." "That's impossible," Jake said, though his conviction was wavering. "Trails don't just change, don't they?" The older voice was patient, almost pitying. "This forest is old. Older than the campground. Older than the trails. Older than the maps your friend carries. It has its own rules, its own appetite." More footprints appeared in the dirt, forming a tight circle around the four friends. The invisible presences were close enough now that they could feel them. Cold spots in the air, the sensation of being watched from mere inches away. "How many of you are there?" Danny asked, his curiosity overriding his fear. "Dozens," The woman's voice replied sadly. Families, couples, solo hikers, all of us came here to enjoy nature, and nature decided to keep us. Marcus laughed, but it was a sound bordering on hysteria. This is insane. You're telling us we're trapped here, that we're going to end up like you. Not if you're smart, a new voice interjected. Young, maybe a teenager. Some people get out. We've seen them. They arrive, they leave the next morning, but they never stay more than one night. What happens if you stay longer? Emma asked, though she dreaded the answer. The silence that followed was answer enough. The forest gets into you, the older voice finally explained. Start small. You misplace things. Forget which way you came from. Then the trails stop making sense. Your compass spins. Your GPS stops working. And slowly, day by day, you become part of the forest instead of just visiting it. Jake was studying the dirt around their feet, counting footprints. Jesus, there must be 20-30 people around us right now. 37. The teenager's voice confirmed. We've been hoping someone would come. Someone who might listen, who might find a way to help us. Help you how? Danny asked. We don't know, the woman admitted. We've tried everything we can think of. Some of us have been here so long we can barely remember what the outside world looks like. But you're still fully here, still completely visible. Maybe you can do something we can't. Emma looked at her friends, seeing her own terror reflected in their faces. What if we just stay by the fire all night, and leave first thing in the morning? You said some people get out. They do, the older voice agreed. But they're usually gone before the sun rises. The longer you stay, the stronger the forest's hold becomes. And dawn is still hours away. As if summoned by his words, a new sound drifted through the trees. It was subtle at first, a creaking groaning noise that might have been wind in the branches. But as they listened, it grew louder and more distinct. It was the sound of trees moving. Not swaying in a breeze, but actually moving. Roots pulling from the earth. Trunks shifting position. Branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Oh no, whispered the teenager's voice. It's starting. What's starting? Jake demanded, but he was already looking toward the tree line. The massive pines that had seemed so stationary and permanent were indeed moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but definitely moving. The trail they had driven in on was being blocked by a pine tree that definitely hadn't been there before. Another tree was sliding across what had been an open space between two campsites. The forest is rearranging itself, the woman's voice explained with resignation. It does this when it wants to keep someone. Changes the layout so you can't find your way back to the road. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and ran toward their truck, but stopped short when he saw that the vehicle was now surrounded by trees that definitely hadn't been there when they parked. The narrow spaces between trunks were far too small for the truck to navigate. This can't be happening, he said, his voice cracking. Trees can't move. Forests can't rearrange themselves. There has to be a rational explanation. But even as he spoke, they could all see it happening. The forest was alive, reshaping itself around them like a living maze. Paths disappeared. New ones opened up, and their small clearing began to feel less like a campsite and more like a prison cell with walls of bark and pine needles. Welcome to Whispering Pines, the older voice said with grim humor. Population, everyone who's ever tried to leave. Emma sank to her knees beside the dying fire, watching in horror as their world literally rearranged itself around them. But as the flames flickered lower and the moving trees crept closer to their clearing, she noticed something the invisible voices hadn't mentioned. Near the edge of their campsite, partially hidden behind what used to be a picnic table, something was glowing with a soft, phosphorescent light. Something that definitely hadn't been there when they set up camp. Danny, she whispered, pointing toward the mysterious glow. Do you see that? But as her friends turned to look, the light suddenly went out, leaving them in darkness that seemed deeper than before. And in that darkness, they heard something new. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, but not invisible ones leaving tracks in the dirt. These footsteps belonged to something they could see, something that was walking toward them through the rearranged forest, something that definitely wasn't human. The creature that emerged from between the relocated trees stood nearly 8 feet tall, its form seeming to shift and waver in the dying firelight, like smoke given substance. What should have been its face was a hollow darkness beneath a crown of twisted branches that grew directly from its skull. Moss and lichens covered its bark-like skin, and its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were 2 points of the same phosphorescent green light they had glimpsed moments before. The forest guardian, breathed the older invisible voice. You need to run, now. But there was nowhere to run. The trees had closed in around their clearing, leaving only narrow passages that twisted into impenetrable darkness. The creature moved with impossible silence for something so large, gliding rather than walking across the forest floor. Jake grabbed a burning log from the fire and held it out like a weapon, but the creature didn't seem concerned by the flames. Instead, it tilted its head, a motion that sent a cascade of dead leaves falling from its antler-like crown. and spoke in a voice like wind through ancient wood. New roots for the grove, it said, the words seeming to come from everywhere at once. Fresh growth for the eternal forest. What do you want with us? Danny demanded, trying to keep his voice steady while positioning himself protectively in front of Emma. Want? The creature's laugh was the sound of breaking branches. The forest does not want. The forest simply is, and you are now part of what is. Marcus backed toward their truck, even though it was clearly blocked by the rearranged trees. This is bullshit. Forests don't have guardian. Trees don't move. None of this is real. Tell that to us, whispered one of the invisible voices, bitterly. We said the same things when we first arrived. The guardian turned toward where the voice had come from, and for a moment its hollow face seemed almost sad. My children struggle still against their transformation. In time, they will understand the beauty of becoming one with the eternal grove. We're not becoming anything, Emma said with more courage than she felt. We're leaving in the morning. The creature's form flickered, becoming more translucent. There is no morning here. There is only the endless cycle of growth, death and rebirth. The sun rises and sets beyond our borders, but within the whispering pines, there is only the eternal twilight of the deep forest. As if to prove its point, they noticed that the darkness around them hadn't changed in the hours since they'd arrived. It was neither getting lighter nor darker, just maintaining that same deep, perpetual gloom that seemed to exist outside of normal time. You're lying, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. It hasn't been that long since sunset. Check your watches, suggested the teenage voice from among the invisibles. They did, and felt their hearts sink. Jake's watch showed 11:47 p.m., but Emma's showed 8:23 p.m. Danny's displayed 2:15 a.m., and Marcus's had stopped entirely at the exact moment they'd entered the campground. Time flows differently here, the Guardian explained, moving closer to their fire. As it approached, the flames began to dim and change color, shifting from orange to the same eerie green as the creature's eyes. Past and present intermingle. The forest remembers all who have walked beneath its boughs, and in remembering, keeps them close. The glow we saw earlier, Emma realized. What was that? A memory, the Guardian replied. A fragment of someone who tried to escape. They almost made it to the boundary, but the forest called them back. Their light still wanders the grove, searching for a way out that no longer exists. Danny pulled out his phone and tried to take a picture of the Guardian, but the screen showed only static. This is some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon. There has to be a scientific explanation. Science? The creature's hollow laugh echoed through the tree. Your science measures only the surface of reality. It cannot explain the songs that trees sing in languages older than human speech, or the dreams that rocks dream over centuries of stillness. But people have escaped, Emma insisted. You told us some people leave. Some are allowed to leave, corrected the woman's invisible voice. Those who understand their place, who respect the forest's sovereignty, they are permitted to carry tales of this place back to the world beyond, to ensure that others will come seeking the wilderness experience they crave. You mean we're bait? Marcus said with dawning horror. The people who escape, they go back and tell others about this amazing hidden campground, and more people come. The forest must feed, the Guardian confirmed. Not on flesh, but on essence, on the spark of life that burns brightest in those who seek communion with nature. Each visitor who stays too long adds their vitality to the eternal grove, becoming part of something far greater than their individual existence. Jake noticed that the fire was burning lower despite having plenty of fuel. The green tinge to the flames was spreading, and he could swear he saw faces flickering in the unnatural fire. Dozens of faces, all watching them with expressions of resignation and strange peace. Fight it, urged the older invisible voice. Don't let it seduce you with talk of becoming part of something greater. We've all heard that speech. We've all felt the pull of surrendering to the forest's embrace. But you're still whole, still yourselves. You can resistance is suffering, the Guardian said gently. Acceptance is peace. Look at the beauty around you, the majesty of trees that have stood for centuries, the perfect silence of a world untouched by human noise and chaos. Is this truly a fate to be feared? Despite everything, Emma found herself actually considering the creature's words. There was something seductive about the idea of never having to return to the stress and noise of modern life, of becoming part of something ancient and eternal. The forest was beautiful, in its own dark way. Emma, no, Danny said sharply, recognizing the dreamy expression that was settling over her features. Don't listen to it. Remember why we came here. For a weekend trip, we have lives to get back to. Jobs, families, dreams. The Guardian's attention focused on Danny, with uncomfortable intensity. What dreams can compare to the dream of the eternal forest? Your human aspirations are but brief sparks against the infinite patience of the grove. Our sparks burn brighter because they're brief, Danny shot back. That's what makes them beautiful. The creature considered this, its form wavering like a heat mirage, perhaps, but beauty fades, young dreamer. The forest endures. A new voice spoke up from among the invisibles. A child's voice, high and frightened. Mommy says we can't go home anymore. She says the trees won't let us. Is that true? The guardian's hollow face turned toward the sound with what might have been tenderness. Home is where you make it. Little seedling, and you have made it here, among the singing pines. I want to go back to my real home. The child insists. I want my toys and my bed, and my dog. Your dog. The guardian paused, and for a moment seemed almost uncertain. What was your dog's name, little one? Buddy. He's a golden retriever, and he likes to play fetch and the child's voice began to fade, as if the speaker was forgetting. The memories blur, the teenager's voice explained sadly. The longer you're here, the harder it becomes to remember the outside world. Some of the older ones can barely remember being human at all. Jake seized on this. That's not natural. That's not beautiful or peaceful. That's horrible. You're stealing people's identities, their memories, everything that makes them who they are. I steal nothing, the guardian replied, but its form seemed less solid than before. The forest simply fills the spaces that emptiness leaves behind. Is it not better to be part of an eternal living system than to cling to the brief painful existence of isolated individuality? Yes, Emma said firmly, surprising everyone including herself. It is better. Because our brief painful existence is ours. Our Ursies, our mistakes, our love for each other, that's what makes us human. The guardian recoiled slightly, as if her words had physical force. You speak of love as if it were precious. It is precious, Danny said, taking Emma's hand. All of it is precious because it won't last forever. That's what you don't understand. Eternity isn't a gift. It's a curse. The creature's form flickered more rapidly now, and the green light in its eyes began to dim. No, the forest is eternal. The grove endures, but the people in it don't. Marcus realized. They fade away, become shadows, lose everything that made them who they were. That's not preservation, that's destruction. The guardian let out a sound like wind howling through empty branches, and suddenly the clearing was filled with activity. The invisible presences around them began to stir, their whispered voices rising in volume and urgency. He's weakening, the older voice said with growing excitement. Your words, they're breaking through the forest's hold. We can feel it. For the first time in however long we've been here, we can feel the pull of the outside world. But as the guardian weakened, something else began to happen. The trees around their clearing started moving faster, creaking and groaning as they rearranged themselves with increasing urgency. The forest was responding to the threat to its guardian. If you want to escape, the teenage voice said urgently, it has to be now, while he's distracted. But you have to take us with you. How? Emma asked. We can't even see you. The light, the woman's voice explained quickly. The phosphorescent glow you saw earlier. That's one of us. Someone who almost made it out. If you can reach that light, if you can guide it to the forest's boundary, we might all be able to follow. The guardian suddenly snapped back to full solidity, its eyes blazing with renewed green fire. No, the grove will not be diminished. If you will not join willingly, then you will be rooted by force. The ground beneath their feet began to shift and change, and they felt something threading up through the soil toward their boots. Roots. The forest was trying to plant them where they stood. Run, shouted the older invisible voice. Follow the glow. It's your only chance. But as they turned to flee, they saw something that stopped them cold. The phosphorescent light had returned, hovering at the edge of the clearing. But it wasn't alone. There were dozens of lights now, scattered throughout the dark forest like fallen stars, and they were all moving toward the clearing. All the lost souls of whispering pines were making their stand. The ghostly lights converged on their clearing like ethereal fireflies, each one pulsing with the same soft phosphorescence they had glimpsed earlier. As the lights drew closer, Emma realized she could make out vague human shapes within each glow, translucent figures that seemed to exist somewhere between visibility and void. My God, Danny whispered, we can see them now. It was true. The invisible presences that had been speaking to them were becoming visible as glowing, semi-transparent figures, men, women, children, all dressed in camping gear from different eras. Some wore modern hiking boots and fleece jackets, while others sported vintage flannel and canvas gear that looked decades old. The guardian's weakening grip, explained the older man, now visible as a bearded figure in 1970s-era camping gear. When his control falters, we become more substantial. The forest guardian roared. A sound like a hurricane tearing through a pine forest, and raised its massive arms. The trees around them responded by moving faster, their branches reaching down like grasping claws while their roots erupted from the ground and seeking tendril. This way, shouted the teenage boy, his ghostly form leading them toward what looked like a solid wall of pine trees. But as they approached, Emma realized there was a narrow gap between the trunks, a passage that hadn't been there moments before. Jake grabbed a burning branch from their dying fire and led the way, with the others close behind. The passage was barely wide enough for them to move single file, and the bark on either side seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. Behind them, the guardian's voice boomed through the forest. You cannot escape what you have already become. The grove claims all who enter. Don't listen to him, urged the woman's voice, now visible as a hiker in her 30s wearing a backpack that still bore price tag. He's been telling us that for months, years, but we're still here, still ourselves even if we're changed. The passage led them deeper into the rearranged forest, winding between trees that creaked and groaned as they continued to shift position. Marcus kept looking over his shoulder, expecting to see the guardian pursuing them, but the creature seemed unable to follow, as if the presence of so many rebellious spirits was creating a barrier it couldn't cross. Where are we going? Emma asked, ducking under a low branch that definitely hadn't been there seconds ago. The boundary, the older man explained, his glowing form drifting alongside them. Every forest has limits, even this one. If we can reach the edge of the whispering pines, we might be able to break free. Might? Danny didn't like the uncertainty in the ghost's voice. No one's ever made it that far before, admitted the teenager. But no one's ever had living people helping them either. You're still connected to the outside world. Your presence might be enough to punch through the barrier. The forest around them was in constant motion now, trees sliding across their path, new passages opening and closing like the chambers of a living heart. It was disorienting and terrifying, but the ghostly figures seemed to know where they were going, leading them through the maze with the determination of people who had been planning this escape for far too long. How long have you all been here? Jake asked as they squeezed through a particularly narrow gap between two massive pine trunks. Time doesn't work the same way here, the woman replied. I came here for a weekend camping trip with my boyfriend in what I thought was, but some of the others remember arriving in the 1980s, the 1990s, the little girl we heard earlier. She's been here the longest. Her family came for a vacation sometime in the 1960s. Emma felt sick. That child has been trapped here for 60 years. The forest preserves, the older man said grimly. She's still 8 years old, still confused about why she can't go home. The guardian calls it a gift, but we know better. They emerged from the passage into another clearing, this one smaller and filled with the decaying remnants of even older campsites. Rusted car parts were scattered among the trees. A 1950s Buick here, a 1960s Volkswagen van there, all being slowly consumed by the forest. Every generation of campers, Marcus realized with horror. How long has this been going on? Since the beginning, the teenager said. Maybe even before there was an official campground. Indigenous peoples in this area told stories about a forest that called to travelers, promising rest and peace, but delivering eternal captivity. Danny stopped walking and pulled out his phone, not to take pictures this time, but to check something. My compass app. It's spinning wildly. We could be walking in circles and never know it. We're not walking in circles, assured the woman. Look at the stars. They looked up through the gaps in the canopy, and saw something that made their hearts leap with hope. The stars were visible. Actual stars, not the strange muted darkness that had covered their original campsite. And more importantly, they could see a faint glow on the horizon. Is that? Emma hardly dared to hope. Dawn, the older man confirmed. We're getting close to the boundary. The forest's influence is weakening. But even as he spoke, they heard the guardian's voice booming through the trees behind them. Closer than before. Children of the grove, you flee toward emptiness and meaninglessness. Return to the eternal embrace of the forest. He's coming, the teenage boy warned. And he's bringing reinforcements. They could hear it now, the sound of massive footsteps, and the groaning of trees being forcibly moved aside. The guardian was pushing through the forest, rearranging it as he came, creating a direct path to pursue them. Run, the older man urged. We'll try to slow him down. How? Jake asked. We're part of this forest now, whether we like it or not. If we concentrate, we can influence it too, just not as strongly as he can. Several of the ghostly figures stopped following them, and instead spread out among the trees. Emma watched in amazement as they placed their translucent hands against the bark of the massive pines, and seemed to merge with them temporarily. The trees shuddered and began moving, but this time they were creating barriers instead of passages, fallen logs across the guardian's path, dense tangles of branches blocking his way. It wouldn't hold him for long, but it might buy them the time they needed. They ran through the lightning forest, following the remaining ghosts, toward what they hoped was freedom. The canopy above grew thinner, allowing more starlight through, and Emma could swear she felt a different kind of breeze, one that carried scents from the outside world instead of the eternal mustiness of the deep forest. There, Danny pointed ahead to where the tree line ended abruptly, revealing a dirt road stretching away into normal-looking countryside. But as they approached the boundary, they encountered something unexpected. The air itself seemed solid here, like an invisible wall that pressed back against them when they tried to move forward. The barrier, the woman explained, her ghostly form flickering more rapidly now that they were at the forest's edge. This is as far as any of us have ever been able to go. Jake pressed his hands against the invisible barrier, feeling it push back with the consistency of thick jelly. There has to be a way through. Try together, suggested the teenage boy, his form becoming more solid as he approached the barrier. All of us, living and dead, maybe combined we can break through. The four friends linked hands and pressed forward against the invisible wall, while the ghostly figures arranged themselves behind them, placing their translucent hands on the living human's shoulder. For a moment, Emma felt the strangest sensation, as if dozens of people were flowing through her, lending her their strength, their desperate desire for freedom. The barrier began to give way. It's working, Marcus shouted, and indeed they could feel themselves pushing through the resistant air, inch by agonizing inch. But behind them, the forest guardian burst through the defensive barriers the other ghosts had created. His towering form was wreathed in shadow and fury, his green eyes blazing like forest fires. No, his voice shook the very foundations of the forest. You are mine. All of you. The grove will not be diminished. The barrier suddenly solidified again, snapping back like a rubber band and sending them all tumbling backward. But this time, something was different. The ghostly figures were more solid now, more real, as if the attempt to break through had somehow strengthened their connection to the living world. Again, shouted the older man. We're closer than we've ever been. Don't give up now. They threw themselves against the barrier once more, every ghost in the forest adding their strength to the effort. The invisible wall began to buckle and warp, reality itself seeming to bend under their combined will. And then, with a sound like breaking glass, it shattered. They tumbled through onto solid ground, real ground, that belonged to the normal world. Emma looked back and gasped. Behind them, the whispering pines stood like a dark wall against the dawn sky. But it was just a normal forest now. No moving trees, no rearranging paths, just regular pine trees swaying gently in a natural breeze. But most amazingly, the ghostly figures were still with them, still translucent, still glowing faintly, but visible and solid enough to be real. We did it, the woman whispered in amazement. We actually did it. We're free. The teenage boy was staring at his hands, watching them flicker between translucent and solid. Are we alive again? Or still dead but, Before anyone could answer, they heard the guardian's voice one last time, echoing from the depths of the forest, but growing fainter with each word. This is not over. The forest remembers. The grove endures. Others will come, and they will fill the spaces you have left empty. Then silent. The normal, natural silence of a forest at dawn, punctuated by bird songs and the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Emma looked at their truck, which now sat on the side of the road exactly where they had left it, with no trees blocking their path. It was as if the forest had released its hold on everything. But she knew better than to trust appearances. We need to warn people, she said urgently. Other campers, hikers, anyone who might come here. Who would believe us? Danny asked. And even if they did, look. He pointed toward the forest, and Emma saw what he meant. There was no sign of the Whispering Pines campground. No weathered wooden sign. No trail leading into the trees. Just an ordinary section of forest road, with ordinary trees on either side. It's hiding again, the older man realized. Waiting for new visitors. The guardian was right about one thing. The forest endures, and it will keep calling to people who seek wilderness experience. Then we make sure people know what to look for, Jake said firmly. We document everything, share our story, create warnings that people will remember. As they talked, something remarkable was happening to the ghostly figures around them. One by one, they were beginning to fade, not disappearing, but becoming more solid, more human. The translucent glow was dimming, replaced by normal flesh tones, and ordinary camping clothes. We're becoming real again, the woman said in wonder, looking at her hands as they solidified, actually, properly alive. But even as the former ghosts celebrated their return to life, Emma noticed something troubling. In the growing daylight, she could see other forests dotting the landscape, dozens of them, stretching to the horizon, dark patches of woodland that seemed just a little too quiet, just a little too still. How many forests, like Whispering Pines, do you think there are? She asked quietly. The others followed her gaze and felt their brief moment of triumph dampen. The older man, now fully solid and human again, adjusted his vintage camping gear with shaking hands. Probably more than we want to know about, he admitted. Ancient places, hungry places, all of them calling to people who just want to connect with nature. As they loaded into Jake's truck, somehow it now had enough room for all the rescued campers. Emma made a decision that would change the course of her life. I'm starting a blog, she announced. A website dedicated to documenting dangerous camping locations, real stories from real people. We'll call it Dark Trees, or something like that. You think people will believe us? Marcus asked. Some will, and maybe that will be enough to save a few lives. As they drove away from Whispering Pines, now invisible behind them once again, Emma looked back one last time. For just a moment, she could swear she saw a familiar green glow flickering between the trees and heard the faint echo of voices calling out for help. New voices, fresh victims who had arrived after their escape, drawn by the forest's irresistible call. The Guardian had been right about one thing. The grove would not remain empty for long. But now, at least there were people in the outside world who knew the truth. People who could fight back against the ancient hungers that lurked in the dark corners of the wilderness. The battle for Whispering Pines was over. The war against the hungry forests had just begun. 3 months later, Emma's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, responding to the latest email that had arrived through the Dark Trails website she'd launched after their escape from Whispering Pines. The blog had gained an unexpected following. Part urban legend enthusiasts, part genuine warnings from people who'd had their own close calls in the wilderness. Another one, she called out to Danny, who was editing video footage in the corner of their apartment. A family camping in the Adirondacks. They say the trails kept changing, leading them in circles. Hoax or real? Danny asked, not looking up from his work. Real, I think. The details match our experience too closely. And look at this. She turned her laptop screen toward him, showing a blurry photograph. They managed to get a picture before they escaped. The image showed what appeared to be trees in motion, their trunks bent at impossible angles, branches reaching across a trail like grasping arms. It was exactly what they'd witnessed in Whispering Pines. Their website had become an unexpected phenomenon. What started as a simple warning about dangerous camping locations had evolved into a comprehensive database of supernatural wilderness encounters. They'd documented over 200 similar incidents across North America, from the Pacific Northwest to the Appalachian Mountains. The pattern was always the same. Isolated camping areas, usually abandoned or little known, where the forest itself seemed to come alive with predatory intelligence. Most people managed to escape after a single night, but some weren't so lucky. Jake knocked on their apartment door, letting himself in with the spare key they'd given him. "You guys need to see this," he said, holding up his tablet. "Remember the Blackwood National Forest case we investigated last month?" Emma nodded. 3 families had gone missing there over the summer, with search and rescue finding no trace of them despite extensive efforts. "I've been monitoring the Park Service communications," Jake continued, setting his tablet on their coffee table. "This morning they found something." The screen showed an official Park Service report, marked confidential. According to the document, rangers had discovered a clearing deep in the Blackwood forest that hadn't appeared on any maps. The clearing contained the abandoned campsites of all 3 missing families, but the families themselves were nowhere to be found. More disturbing were the rangers' notes about the site. Trees appear to have been recently repositioned. Compass readings inconsistent. Recommend closing area to public access. They're covering it up, Danny realized. The Park Service knows something's wrong, but they're not telling the public. "Can you blame them?" Marcus asked, emerging from the kitchen with a cup of coffee. He'd been staying with them more often lately, claiming their old apartment felt too isolated after their experience. "What are they supposed to say?" "Warning, some of our forests are carnivorous." Emma was already pulling up a map on her computer, marking the location of the Blackwood incident. Red pins dotted the display, each one representing a confirmed dangerous forest encounter they'd documented. The pattern was becoming clear and deeply troubling. The incidents were spreading. What had once been isolated occurrences in remote locations were now happening closer to populated areas, and with increasing frequency. Emma's database showed a 300% increase in supernatural forest encounters over the past year alone. "It's like they're expanding their territory," she murmured, studying the map. "Or maybe they're getting hungry." Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She'd learned to answer all calls since launching the website. Many of their best leads came from people who were too frightened to email their stories. "Dark Trails, this is Emma. Thank God you answered." The voice on the other end was a woman, middle-aged, speaking in rapid, panicked sentences. "My daughter, she's missing. She went camping with friends in Oregon. The rangers are saying she probably just got lost, but I know better. I've been reading your website." "Slow down," Emma said gently, motioning for the others to gather around. She put the phone on speaker. "Tell me what happened." "Sarah and 3 friends went to a place called Whisper Lake. It's supposed to be this beautiful, secluded campground that you can only reach by hiking. They were supposed to be back yesterday, but when they didn't show up, the park rangers went to look." Emma felt ice water in her veins. What did they find? Their campsite. Everything was there. Tents, food, even their cell phones. But no sign of the kids. The ranger I spoke to said something strange though. He said the campsite was in the wrong location. "What do you mean?" "According to their GPS coordinates, they should have been camping at Whisper Lake. But the rangers found their site 3 miles away, in a completely different part of the forest. The rangers said it was impossible. There's no trail connecting those areas." Emma was already typing Whisper Lake, Oregon into her search engine. The results made her blood run cold. Whisper Lake Campground had been closed since 1978. After a series of disappearances, the area was now officially designated as ecologically sensitive and off-limits to the public. But according to recent hiking forums and travel blogs, people were still visiting the lake. Somehow the closed campground was still attracting visitors who claimed to have found secret trails leading to pristine, undeveloped camping areas. Miss Emma realized she didn't have the caller's name. Patterson. Linda Patterson. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to email me everything you have. Photos, GPS coordinates, contact information for the rangers involved. We'll look into this immediately. After ending the call, Emma turned to her friends with grim determination. We need to go to Oregon. Emma, no, Danny said immediately. We barely survived Whispering Pines, and that was with help from the people who were already trapped there. If this Whisper Lake place is actively hunting, if it's evolved beyond just trapping people who stay too long, then those kids don't have a chance, unless someone helps them, Emma finished. And we're the only people who really understand what they're facing. Marcus set down his coffee mug with shaking hands. You're talking about walking into one of these forest traps deliberately. That's insane. Is it? Emma pulled up her database, scrolling through hundreds of reports. Look at the escalation pattern. These things are getting bolder, more aggressive. How long before they start targeting populated areas? Before they don't wait for people to come to them? Jake was studying the map, his military training showing in his systematic analysis of the data point. She's right about the expansion pattern. If we plot the incidents chronologically, they're definitely spreading outward from remote areas toward civilization. Plus, we have advantages now that we didn't have before, Emma continued. We know what we're dealing with. We have experience. And we have allies. She gestured toward the corner of the room, where a familiar translucent figure was sitting in an armchair, reading a book. It was the older man from Whispering Pines, Harold. They'd learned his name, even though they'd all returned to physical form after escaping the forest. Some of the rescued campers retained a connection to the supernatural. Harold could become semi-corporeal at will, existing between the physical and spiritual world. Harold's been scouting other dangerous forests, Emma explained. He can enter them without being trapped because he's already been claimed once. He's our reconnaissance. Harold looked up from his book and became fully solid with visible effort. I've been to 17 different locations over the past month. They're all connected somehow, a network of supernatural forests that seem to communicate with each other. The Whisper Lake entity is particularly aggressive. It's been actively luring people in rather than waiting for them to stumble across it. Danny ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Emma recognized as his way of processing stress. Even if we could help those kids, and that's a big if, what's our endgame here? We can't fight every evil forest in North America. No, Emma agreed. But we can figure out how to stop them. Harold's reconnaissance has revealed something important. These forests aren't natural. They're the result of something that was done to them, some kind of supernatural contamination that's spreading. She pulled up a new file on her computer, months of research compiled from folklore, indigenous legends, and historical records. Every single dangerous forest we've documented has one thing in common. They're all located on sites where significant environmental trauma occurred. Clear-cutting, mining, industrial accidents that poisoned the ground. You think someone's deliberately creating these things? Marcus asked. I think something is taking advantage of wounded landscapes to establish footholds in our world, Emma replied. The question is what, and how do we stop it? Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw your website, have information about the Oregon situation. Meet me at the Riverside Diner on Highway 101, noon tomorrow. Come alone. A friend who knows the real history. Emma showed the message to the others. Looks like we're not the only ones investigating this. Could be a trap, Jake warned. Everything we do now is potentially a trap, Emma pointed out. But those kids are running out of time. Mrs. Patterson said they've been missing for over If Whisper Lake follows the same pattern as other aggressive forests, it won't wait long before making them disappear permanently. Danny sighed and closed his laptop. If we're doing this, we do it right. Full preparation, multiple escape plans, and we stick together no matter what. Agreed, Emma said. But first, I'm meeting this mysterious contact. We need to understand what we're really dealing with. As they began planning their most dangerous mission yet, none of them noticed the shadow that had been growing longer outside their apartment window. Nor did they see the way the potted plants on their fire escape had begun to lean toward the glass, as if trying to reach inside. The forests weren't just expanding their territory, they were learning to hunt. And Emma Martinez, who had started as just another camper looking for a peaceful weekend in nature, had unknowingly made herself the primary target of something far older and hungrier than anything the modern world was prepared to face. The war against the hungry forests was escalating, and the forests were starting to fight back. The end for now. And there you have it, folks. Emma Martinez thought her weekend camping trip was over when she escaped Whispering Pines. But sometimes, escaping a nightmare is just the beginning of something far worse. But Emma's story is far from over. Who is this mysterious contact who claims to know the real history? What ancient force is really behind these spreading forest plagues? And most terrifyingly, what happens when these hungry woodlands decide they're tired of waiting for victims to come to them? The answers are coming. And trust me, you're not going to like what we discover. So here's what I need from you. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button. And I've got a question that's been haunting me. Have you ever been camping somewhere that felt wrong, where the silence was too complete, the shadows too deep? Drop your experiences in the comments below. Your story might just inspire the next terrifying tale. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell because Emma's journey into America's darkest wilderness is just getting started. Next week, we'll follow her to that fateful meeting at the Riverside Diner, where she'll learn the truth about what's really growing in our nation's forests. Until then, stay safe out there, and remember, not all of nature's beauty is meant to be explored. Some places are hungry, some forests remember, and some camping trips you never come back from. Sweet dreams, everyone. And maybe, stay out of the woods for a while.